Hedwig Potthast was the other woman in the life of Heinrich Himmler. He had an extramarital affair with her. In this video, I shall tell the story of Himmler's other woman. Hedwig Potthast was born here in Cologne on the 5th of February 1912. Her father was in business and so could provide a relatively comfortable living for his family. On finishing school, Hedwig Potthast went to Mannheim, where she trained in what is called in German a foreign language correspondent. That is to say, someone who does office work in two languages. In the 1930s, this would have been good to find a job in an international company and thus have a much better paying position. On completion of this course, Potthast got a job in Koblenz. Whilst there, she met Kurt Freiherr von Schröder, partner at the Stein Bank and one of a group of wealthy conservatives who had helped steer Hitler into power in January 1933. Von Schröder did well out of the Third Reich, getting a seat on the board of the German railways amongst other things. He in turn showed his gratitude by forming the Freundeskreis Reichsführer SS, the circle of friends of the Reichsführer SS Himmler. This was a body of industrialists who donated approximately 1 million Reichsmarks annually to Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler. For this purpose, the special account S was set up at the J.H. Stein Bank in Cologne. Himmler in turn showed his gratitude to 15 of them by giving them honorary ranks in the SS. It was von Schröder who introduced Potthast to Himmler. This allowed Potthast to be transferred to the Gestapo office in Berlin in 1934, where 2 years later she became Himmler's private secretary, and in this role was particularly responsible for Himmler's sponsorships and gift giving. Heinrich Himmler was married. His wife was Margarethe, born here in Bydgoszcz in Poland, although then it was called Bromberg and was part of the German Second Reich. Her parents were wealthy landowners. She completed training as a nurse, which she completed during the First World War, and then she worked for the German Red Cross. Her childless first marriage failed after a short time and ended in divorce. Thanks to her father's economic support, she was able to become a partner in a private clinic in Berlin. It was the sale of this business that allowed her to buy a home in Munich with her new husband Heinrich and have a chicken business, which allowed him to devote so much time to his political activities. She was 19 years older than Hedwig, and given that it was her money that had supported them in the early part of their marriage, she must have been very hurt by what happened. Hedwig Potthast was called Bunny by everyone on the staff of the Reichsführer SS. She had blonde hair and blue eyes and was friendly, warm-hearted, rather intellectual and down-to-earth. It is said that everyone liked her, so in many ways she was the opposite of Himmler's wife Margarethe. We, of course, do not know when Hedwig Potthast and Heinrich Himmler started to be an item, but we do have correspondence from her which gives a clue. At Christmas 1938, there was a discussion between me and him in which we confessed that we loved each other beyond redemption. Hedwig Potthast later wrote to her sister Tilda in November 1941. It's a long letter and it's now in the Federal Archives in Koblenz. Hedwig Potthast wrote that Himmler and she had considered every day for 2 years whether they could come together in a decent way. It is not an option for him to get a divorce without further ado. The only child will be leaving the parental home in a few years anyway, so I won't be taking anything away from him, she wrote. In the letter, Potthast also expressed sympathy for the deceived woman who was unable to become pregnant again after the birth of her daughter Gudrun in August 1928. But the woman can't help it that she can't have any more children. At 48, she's past the age at which this would be possible in any normal way. That's why she, Hedwig, and he have each other and were determined to have children and to be together as often as possible without taking away the woman's rights. Margarethe Himmler sent doilies and sweets for the young secretary at Christmas 1937. She would have met her as Himmler probably brought her back with him on trips before anything started to happen between the two of them. The following Christmas, however, Fräulein Potthas was no longer on the presents list. What I experienced this year, Margarethe wrote in a diary on New Year's Eve 1938, was unimaginable. I suspect, therefore, that she already knew, though most historians believe it was later that Margarethe Himmler found out that her husband was not being faithful to her. Hedwig Potthast's parents must have known by the letter of December 1941 they would never accept this extramarital relationship. Potthast had a sublet flat in Berlin-Steglitz. The entries, office in the evening, in Himmler's pocket diary from 1940 were possibly code for the time he was spending with her. Meanwhile, his wife wrote in her diary, H doesn't come home anymore in the evening. In February 1941, Hedwig Potthast moved from her rented room in Steglitz into an SS villa in Berlin-Grunewald. Towards the end of that year, she resigned from the personal staff of the Reichsführer SS before the pregnancy became too noticeable. On the 15th of February 1942, their son Helga was born here at the Hohenlychen Clinic. Himmler, raised as a Catholic, did not need long to give his relaxed approach, marital fidelity and ideological foundation. At the end of 1939, he issued what might be called a child production order, in which he asked his SS men to have extramarital affairs. The aim of the command was to promote births and quickly strengthened war-weakened Germany with racially perfect new citizens. The National Socialists called these communities of convenience Friedel marriages, which followed Germanic customs from the 8th century. From then on, he publicly propagated the right of a second wife for all members of the SS. Himmler found it unreasonable for a normal man to have only one wife for his entire life, because this could lead to hypocrisy, arguments and frustration, and thus the stagnating production of young talent. He also hoped, as he is once said to have confided in his Maser Felix Kirsten, that the competition in a double marriage would encourage one woman to spur the other on. Other wives in the Nazi entourage actually came to terms with this idea. For example, Gerda Bormann, the wife of the party's head of the Chancellery. She is said to have even advised her husband Martin that only one of the two women should ever become pregnant at any one time, so that the other one would be available for his convenience. Margarethe Himmler found it difficult to come to terms with this bigamous system at home on Lake Tegernsee. But what could she say against it, since she herself could no longer bear any sons for Germany? 3 days before her 50th birthday in September 1943, she wrote in her diary that she had experienced so much trouble in her life. "There's nothing to look forward to," she complained. Despite his order to have children, Himmler never openly acknowledged Hedwig Potthast. I think that this was because he could see the hypocrisy of the idea of the perfect family promoted by the Nazis and that of having a second wife. He would have been only too aware of the problems in the marriage of Josef and Magda Goebbels, often portrayed as being the first family of the Third Reich. Joachim Peiper, probably best known for his later role in the Battle of the Bulge, was part of the inner circle of the Reichsführer SS from 1938 to 1941. Jochen, as Himmler affectionately called him, was very close. He kept his calendar, accompanied him on trips, organised incognito visits to his lover, which Himmler occasionally undertook as a professor from Berlin, or at least that's how he described it. Joachim Peiper also delivered private mail, the sort of stuff that he didn't want to put in the post. Peiper knew Hedwig Potthast as he'd married her work colleague Sigrid Hinrichsen in 1939, and Hedwig and Sigurd were close friends. Apart from a handful of confidants, hardly anyone else knew about Himmler's ongoing affair. It probably wasn't wise to gossip about Himmler, even to Hitler, who loved gossip and wanted to know who was seeing who, and at times seems to have been a bit of a matchmaker. Years later, even his brother Gebhard Himmler assured in an interview that he'd only found out about it after the war. Only Hedwig confessed it to her sister in that long letter from 1941. I have consciously remained silent until now so as not to burden anyone else with the responsibility that HH and I alone bear. In the summer or autumn of 1943, Hedwig and Helga moved into a former forester's house in Brückentin, Brandenburg, which the child's father had extensively renovated. Himmler, apparently, had very similar plans for his bunny as he once had for Marga, to live in the country, ideally as a self-sufficient person. Brückentin is 10 kilometers to the southeast of Neustrelitz and near the estate of Oswald Pearl. Potthast was friends with Eleonora Pearl, the wife of Oswald Pearl. Lena Heydrich and Gerda Bormann were also among her friends. Lena Heydrich had a particularly bad relationship with Margarethe Himmler, and being a spiteful woman herself, no doubt welcomed the intervention of a second woman in the life of her husband's boss. Hedwig had reported to her sister in another letter in November 1941 that Heinrich Himmler wanted to buy a country house on a piece of land as soon as the war's over. That would always be her home and her refuge. He also had the idea of breeding small animals or growing berries. The idea is not bad, remarked Potthast. I wonder if Margarethe Himmler ever found out about these plans and what she would have thought. After all, he discussed the very same plans with her. Heinrich Himmler and Hedwig Potthast had a second child, a daughter, Nanette Dorothea, born on the 20th of June 1944, also in the Hohenlychen Sanatorium. You give me your dear beloved heart and yourself completely and our two sweet children, Himmler wrote to Potthast 17 days after the birth. This letter is one of the few surviving letters to her. It appeared at an internet auction in 2005. I have only one wish, that despite everything difficult, you may be as happy as you've made me and made me every day. Himmler ends with, I kiss you, dear good hands and your sweet mouth. He had used exactly the same words when writing to his wife. However, when writing to Potthast, he signed himself off the Germanic symbol that looks a bit like an X, but it has a line through it, and it's pronounced H. A bit like the letter that looks like an X in Russian, which is also pronounced H. The more serious the situation in the war became, the less news Bunny had from X. Contact for this couple was now limited to letters and telephone calls. Hedwig didn't seem particularly bothered by that. At the end of 1944, she wrote to her, Dear man, above all, I wish you strength for the task that the leader and the fatherland have given you. Then everything is small. We are, and I'm poor. As so often, she said goodbye with the words, Don't forget me again. Schonau am Königssee is located at the northern end of the glacial lake Königssee, a few kilometers to the south of Berchtesgaden. In my opinion, this is the most attractive part of Germany, in a wonderful mountain area surrounded by the snow-covered peaks. On most days one can see the Eagle's Nest, the house built for Hitler by Martin Bormann, but which the Führer did not like to visit. It was to here that Himmler had Hedwig Potthas sent in the summer of 1944. I suspect that the excuse he used was for her to be close to Hitler's home and sometimes headquarters, but of course after July 1944 Hitler never came back. The real reason was to get her out of potential danger. Just before the 20th of July 1944, Himmler told his wife Margarethe to get out of Berlin, which she was then visiting. It's true that bombing raids on rural Brandenburg were not likely, but in the Alps she was much safer. Himmler had a house built for them there. We know more about Heinrich Himmler's relationship with his wife as they were together longer, and there are more witnesses, and because Margarethe Himmler kept a diary. Himmler hardly ever saw his wife. I suspect that he had little time for his mistress either. The movements of Himmler are documented well, and here we can see that the two were not often in the same place at the same time. Once she was at home as a mother, it is unlikely that Himmler told her much about what he was doing in his official role as Reichsführer SS. In National Socialist ideology, the role of the woman was to stay at home and look after the children and the house. The last time that they met was probably in the middle of March 1945, but Himmler did telephone her almost every day until the 19th of April 1945. Hitler's birthday on the 20th of April 1945, Himmler, it could be argued, was almost on the run, first attempting to negotiate with the Allies, then attempting to escape from the Nazi police system he'd helped set up, and then trying to escape from the Allies. Himmler was arrested by the British the following month and committed suicide. At the end of the war, Hedwig Potthas was at Lake Achensee in Austria. After learning of Himmler's death over the radio on the 23rd of May 1945, she moved in with her friend Eleonora Perl at Rosenheim. Her husband, Oswald Perl, had been the head of the SS main economic and administrative office, and thus was in charge of the Nazi concentration camps. He was also on the run, initially hiding in Upper Bavaria, possibly not too far from where his wife was living, although he later fled to the north of Germany. He was arrested near Bremen in May 1946. Hedwig Potthast was arrested at the Perl home in the summer of 1945. She was interrogated for several days in Munich by US intelligence. She was released and accommodated in the Himmler couple's Lindenfichter estate in Gmund am Tegernsee, where Hilda, Himmler's sister-in-law, lived at the time. Margarethe Himmler, to her credit, did try to contact Hedwig Potthast, but these attempts were rebuffed. However, Potthas did remain in contact with the family of Gebhard Himmler, the brother of the Reichsführer SS who lived in Gmund, and with Himmler's former close confidant, Karl Wolff, for several years. Another guest at her house was Martin Bormann Jr., the namesake son of the former head of the party office, and possibly the most wanted man in the world in the early 1950s. He remembered two pieces of furniture that he saw during a visit to Bunny's apartment after the war: a table and chair made from the bones of concentration camp prisoners. How he recognized them as such, I have no idea. Hedwig Potthast married and tried to remain as anonymous as possible. She was tracked down by Peter Ferdinand Koch, a journalist for Der Spiegel, in 1987. She talked to him, but either remained silent or claimed to know nothing of Himmler's responsibility for Nazi crimes. Perhaps I also need to point out that this Peter Koch from Der Spiegel is not the same as the Peter Koch who worked for Stern, whose name is above all associated with the Hitler diaries. This is Baden-Baden, a spa town close to the border with France. It was here that Hedwig Potthas died on the 22nd of September 1994, aged 82. I hope you found that interesting. I upload every Friday at 2000 hours. That's 2000 hours my time. I live in Poland and Germany, so if you live somewhere else it'll be a different time. But I always upload at the same time. I also occasionally upload on other days as well, and sometimes do live broadcasts. So if you're interested in knowing when I'm going to do that, then you might want to subscribe. If you're interested in this sort of thing, then you might also want to see the videos that I did on Himmler's wife, Margarethe Himmler, which you can find from the link which will now appear. For the moment, thank you very much, and all the best from me.